Okay, so we're doing this live. I think I finally figure out what my issues are on having hangouts on streams is because I just have to upgrade my PC. I think it's getting a little bit wobbly, so I'm using my laptop for this, and I have my guest here. Well, you have several nicknames, but I use Mythril Shield for the stream, for the purposes. Isn't that your biggest channel?
Yeah, and it's the one I've probably produced the best videos on in general. And
Yeah, and yeah. So and you also go by Squall Lionheart, I believe, on
my
your
actual
other
name,
channel.
actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if I showed you my license,
Um.
it would say Swolien, right?
Oh, nice. And we've been going a little bit back and forth, and we had saying we spoke, and so I just wanted to have like one general topic of from that. It's a very broad topic, but in general, what do you consider the word ethics to hold?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that too, because it's used so much. But to my mind, ethics is a system of something slightly less than morals and slightly more than etiquette, where there is a right and a wrong in terms of how do you put this? It's an interesting question. So something ethical would be something.
I mean,
yeah, that fits in society with respect to people who have to interact with it, and doesn't hold things that would be misleading or manipulative.
Okay, I look at it as it's the theory which we base our morals on. So what nothing you'll always use in a real life, like say a pacifist. You're not always gonna be using weapons, but an ethical stand would be, say you don't want to use weapons, or you're just a pacifist. But when you actually have to do it in real life, that's what when it becomes a moral issue. So I think ethical or ethics, personally, I would use as the theory of your own morals. So before you actually take a stand in a situation where you have to use your morals, or use an argument, or your choice, you have something to pick off of, which you've maybe thought of before. So that's what I look or view ethics as. And
so that makes some sense, and I guess that helps me clarify a little bit. I think ethics are the decisions based on the morals. So in the case like you brought up as a pacifist, your moral would be non-violence or not causing harm. So the ethical application of that in your ethics tome, whatever you want to call it, would be not raising a fist to somebody. That would be the ethical decision. But then there'd be things like, well, what if somebody's committing violence against many people? Something like that. Maybe the ethical decision is not the moral decision.
Yeah, and like there is always things. How far does your ethics go, and how are you gonna how are you gonna use it? So when let's say if we use the analogy of weapons or violence, and there is let's say genocide, if we're going to use an extreme example, are you gonna if you say you have a position of power, are you gonna try to stop that, or are you gonna stick to your principles, or are you gonna do a compromise? And I think that's a some people would say I think that's I'm not usually for violence in general, but that's a case where I would intervene, for example. But if it's let's say a fight between two people, you would not get involved. You would try to even maybe de-escalate the situation. So I think
I was in that situation in the past year, and I did put myself in between the two ladies that were fighting on the subway, actually, in New York City. That to me seemed to be the ethical decision because it didn't only affect them, especially. And I saw the argument from the very beginning. It was just ridiculous nonsense.
Yeah, and so I did a course in college, which was pretty interesting. It was split into two, so it was basically organization theory, but there was also a part of ethics in regards to not just in regards to business, but generally ethics. So we had some theories which for example, on our exam we had a situation where we were gonna touch on moral relativism, consequential ethics, and also I don't know. I can't remember who theorized this, and a feel-good ethics, so to speak. So when that goes to, so if you do something and you good ethics, but it's kind of vague. But then you have the consequential ethics, where you have you see the consequences afterwards. So let's say you have your fight, you stop the fight, and you see no people getting injured. That's a direct consequence of you intervening because of your ethics and actually using them. And then you have the moral relativists that would change their ethics or their morals that suits the situation they're in, which we've seen, I would say, a lot of in society, and the extreme left and right, they use that quite a lot in regards to moral relativism. And so that's a quite interesting exam I had, touching on those three types of ethics. What would you think about those three?
It's funny.
Sorry, did your mic cut out? I can't hear you. Because I just watched the stream, and there's well, might be just me. I can't hear. I think you're something cut out. So that's what happens when you're on here, because you're not picking up on the stream either. Well, that's what happens when you're on doing a stream. Sometimes stuff happens, and yeah, you cut out. So let's see if we can fix it in the meantime. You probably hear my dog barking. I have to probably let him out in not too long. But yeah, he's. If you hear some barking in the background, that's because of my dog wants to be entertained. So let's see if you can jump back in with Mithril Shield.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right.
some reason. I think it's just something popped and I couldn't hear you for some reason. I was checking if it was just me.
The front USB ports on my computer. I have two 2.0s and one 3.0, and the 2.0s are completely worn out. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Go back to what we were saying.
So where did I cut out?
It just cut out when you started talking. So when I so yeah. So if you can just start from the top.
So okay, I was saying, like, sorting out my thoughts actively as we're having this conversation. I think ethics has to be layered. So there's personal, interpersonal, which is between you and other people or a few other people. The social ethics, social dynamics, so the broader society and culture, and then all of humanity and all of humanity's interaction with the entire Earth. And I'm thinking about it now, there really is no way to talk about it unless you first identified what arena the ethics are playing in. So like with the example I talked about and the two ladies in the subway, I intervened in that fight, not because I would intervene in every fight, but because there was one person who was extremely aggressive and the other lady who was clearly not going to be capable of defending herself. And the woman who wouldn't have been capable of defending herself, and what caused the whole fight in the first place, was there were two little kids involved. And the little kid had bumped into the lady that was being really, really nasty. And she ended up being the one that attacked. So in that case, it was the other people in the subway trying to get where we were going. If a fight broke out, the subway would have been stopped. Police would have come on the train. The little kids who didn't deserve that, and the woman who would not have been able to defend herself. But if it was two people, and for instance, it seemed very clear that somebody needed to get their ass kicked, I probably just would have watched and enjoyed it myself.
Spectator sport.
Yeah. So on the personal level, I don't have an objection to fighting. Sometimes it's necessary. It depends on the broader context of it. So it's funny because I'm thinking about it. Ethics can be fluid depending on the context.
Yeah. And that's why I used the whole genocide situation and the fight situation, because there is a big contextual difference, but that general theme is still violence between people. One is probably the most extreme case you can find, and someone is the most common theme. You can find a disagreement that turns into a dispute, and then turns into punches and a fight between two people. And I think situations and context really decides how your ethics is really what it really is. But that's why it's also very important, I think, because I think in the political scape, as I said, with the far right and far left, or just general authoritarians, they are very good at justifying this moral relativism, where they use double standards and adjust their ethics and their morals according to the situations, so it benefits either the cause or them personally. So that's why it's very interesting have the difference between just the concept of ethics and still being consistent with your ethics and having moral relativism.
So right, there's an interesting situation politically when dealing with ethics, because if you believe that the ends justify the means, for instance, you can make a very ethical case for the way that SJWs are now, they're being called NPCs act, right? Because in the end, after all of these efforts are completed, the world will theoretically be a better place. Although I don't agree with that, but I think you can make that case. And actually, I want to play devil's advocate with you for a second here.
Sure.
Because this is a thought experiment for me now. So when you say ethics, my mind immediately goes to Gamergate, because that was a big ethics effort. Could you, given the idea that the ethics of the situation depends on the context and the layer that you're working at, do you think you could?
So, could you just repeat you cut out a little bit? What was the initial question?
So, given the structure of ethics being based on the layer of relationship that you're working with, so between two people or between several people or between larger society, could you analyze, for instance, the Zoe Quinn incident and see an argument to make that there were positive ethical decisions made in that situation?
What do you mean? The case itself?
So in the case of the very original thing that sort of set it all off, where she was allegedly sleeping with one of the writers, and he wrote a good review for her game. In that situation, could you see where there were correct ethics involved in what happened?
Having a relationship in itself isn't really unethical. It's I would use the consequential ethics theory here, because just look at the consequences of that situation. So you have two people who are both benefiting from it while lying about it to the public. The one is supposed to be an advocate for truth, which I would say a journalist is, but hid the fact that they had a personal relationship and was promoting her and not disclosing that fact. Had that fact been actually disclosed, I wouldn't actually have had an issue with it. It's actually lying that that is the unethical part.
So that's the broader context where it was unethical. But I think if we got into a smaller cosm, you'd be able to make a case that there was actually ethical behavior there, albeit naive ethical behavior.
In what sense do you mean?
So the journalist, he wrote a positive article trying to support a friend. That's good ethics. That's helping somebody who you care about, making an effort to do something good for somebody else. And it was naive in the fact that you question, in that position, who are you more responsible to? So he tried to be responsible for a friend and help them, missing the fact that the end consumer of his product is relying on him to make an unbiased and clear opinion piece to help them make a purchase decision. And that's where it became unethical.
Yeah, I see. That's why you can use I can't remember the theory, but the feeling ethic, where you're trying to do a good thing. You're trying to make others and yourself feel good by trying to do a good, but that can result in people being naive and being blinded. So in that sense, it could be viewed as ethical. Especially between those two, as you said, a microcosm between those two. The one person was trying to do something good towards the others, but if you look at the context of the entire situation, then it changes. So if you just look at the aspect of someone trying to do a favor and something good for someone else, That's a good thing in essence, but what the consequences and for other people it might be, then it's a completely different situation.
So then that raises an interesting question for me: is how do you judge between the value of the broader ethics of community and people that you don't know, for instance, and should do right by for whatever reason, maybe it's your job or maybe just society as a whole, versus personal ethics and interpersonal ethics of the people that you care about, that care about you, and that you are more intimately aware of their circumstances.
That's an interesting question. I think when it's not relied, let's say, to your public persona, so to speak, when it's not related to your job, or if you volunteer or do anything for organizations, and just do something for friends, family, or someone, I think you can have a different approach to it. If you buy someone groceries, and but you don't feed, you don't send money towards the children in Africa, I would say it's still a good thing, even though it might have less worth to society or the world at large. But if you work at a store, or not a store, what would be? Let's say if you work at a Red Cross, and you would help your friend with supplies from work, instead of helping some children in need. That's a completely different context. I think you also have to, even though it's kind of a cop out, but you also have to always look at the lesser of two evils. When you're, for example, in combat, a field medic always has to use his judgment and try to save as many people as possible. But if there's someone who has both feet shot off and both hands shot off and is basically bleeding out, well, you can perhaps save someone who's gotten shot in the neck, and you can stop the bleeding faster than the other person is bleeding out. You have to a choice, and the choice is basically on, and the consequences is that you are saving one, but you have to let the other die.
So that's basically triage, right? And that's something. A situation like that, it's not that there's a good choice; it's just making a judgment call. But I think you also clarified incidentally for me the other one, in terms of how do you parse between your personal interests and the interests of your loved ones versus society. And I think maybe part of the answer is the level of public influence and power you hold.
Yeah. There was actually a quite interesting case here in Norway, where there was someone who had a friend, but that friend was qualified. This was for a I don't know what it's called. What would it be the equivalent in the US? Basically, the foreign department, to have a job there. And this person who was in the government knew this person and recommended this person to get the job based on qualifications. What would you say to that? If the person
again, they were recommended based on qualifications, but they knew somebody?
Yeah, so they were friends with that person, but they recommended that person as well for the job. But in the end, what happened was the person who recommended her was deemed liable, and she had to resign from her job again. What would you say to that? Should you recuse yourself, or can you be objective in that sort of sense when you have both worlds clashing?
And what was the position?
Basically, in the foreign department, it was higher up, but he wouldn't direct, just recommending her for a position in the government.
So I guess part of my question is how much influence and control within the government does that give you? So in terms of local laws or policy or things like that.
It will be with a foreign department. So
right, but that could just be like going and basically foreign PR, making good friends with other countries.
Yeah, well, it was a higher up job, so you would actually have decisions on, for example, if a Norwegian got arrested, you would have to have some dealings with that, or sending people out, deporting them from Norway, for example.
Okay, but would the position be responsible for informing policy or laws?
No.
Okay, so that actually is a gray area where I could accept it. And just on the basis, this is something I've thought about a lot, actually. Like networking and friends hiring friends. If it's something where there's more trust involved and not as much authority, because it sounds like you're dealing with international situations, but they're not controlling the government. They're not just dictating the direction the country goes in, for instance. They're just doing a job like a police officer might.
Yeah, that's the best analogy. It would be basically what a police officer would do, but just in foreign relations and things like that. They wouldn't do any policy, lawmaking, anything like that.
Right. So when it's public service more than public authority, I would actually be a little bit more comfortable with that, because it just makes sense to favor hiring somebody that you know very well, and you have a lot more reason to believe you can trust this person in this position than somebody that you've only known for 2 hours during an interview.
Yeah, and I thought it was a little bit of too much outrage, to be honest here, because Norway is such a safe country. There's, as you can imagine, there's not a lot of stuff going on here. So that was kind of the big case for a week or something. I think it was like 10 years ago or something like that. But it raised an interesting question of, should you recuse yourself in recommending someone like that? Or are you able to do that?
Yeah, maybe. And if the person had the final decision in hiring, I can see where that starts to breach.
I don't think that person. I don't think that person had sole power to hiring someone.
Okay, so then even more so that if that's the case, I see less and less of a problem with it.
Yeah. Okay.
If the person's qualified, and it's like I said, it's a lot easier to trust somebody that you know through and through than somebody. I mean, no matter how much due diligence you do, you can't know everything about somebody you just met.
That's true. Yeah, when you do hire someone, if you're in the position where you're looking for someone who is supposed to make money for your business and be a face and a representative, and they do well in that, let's say 45 to an hour interview, but you've quickly found out they really suck at their job, that would be a bigger cost and when time and effort than actually hiring someone you would actually know.
Well, and it's especially important in foreign relations, because the biggest thing I would think there is knowing how this person's going to treat other people, especially in different situations of stress, or if they get along with them. And it would take a really long time to figure that out with somebody that you've never met.
Yeah. And I mean, since we're on bigger topics, I know I don't want to directly talk about Brett Kavanaugh. I wanted to talk about the people who were around that situation, the politicians. Do you think the people in that situation handled that ethically?
I found that whole thing to be absolutely deplorable. I honestly, I think I watched about 6 hours of the hearings, and I couldn't stand what I was seeing from anybody. Like, it was just a dog and pony show, and the level of, like, these people have such an important view of themselves. It was just what kept on going through my head, and it was
Yeah.
totally wrong the way it was handled at all. Period. Like, publicly showing all of that was wrong on every level.
Yeah. I think how not only ethically, just how they treated someone who is. I hate that they used that phrase. It's just a job interview, and anything goes. But if you're going into the job interview, you're not. So there's not suddenly 40 years ago accusing you of rape if you're, let's say, trying to get a convenience store job. Like that wouldn't happen in anywhere. And it's to see if someone is qualified, and not to see what
Right.
someone who's doing something uncorroborated, and just to smear them in public. I think that was highly unethical to do, because it's not a court of law, and they made it a public opinion court.
Somewhat. I do get the argument in that if you're going to be presiding over the highest court in the land, you don't want somebody who has flexible morals, especially on some of the most
I agree.
egregious things a person can commit. So there's so many layers and levels to analyze that whole situation on. So it's like, did Kavanaugh handle it the way he should have, given the situation?
Probably not.
Right, to some extent. But at the same time, it seemed like one of the things he was upset about is the effects it was having on other people's lives that he cared about. You should be upset
Yeah.
about that. I mean, he's still a human being. You still want him to be a human being. But if we're just focusing on ethics, I think that handling rape accusations that way is totally unethical, and it actually got me thinking about it in general. Like, listen and believe, right?
Yeah.
I think that's actually an ethical argument, and I think it's a sound argument. You want to be skeptical towards any accusations, but you don't want to treat a victim ever with skepticism. You don't want to make it. So I'm talking about
that's
actual
actually. Yeah. Because it's an interesting. Because I've been also thinking on because I've had a hard stance on trust but verify, but
Yes.
with rape, it's so hard to judge situations. Like, over the internet, I can dismiss someone if they don't have proof or anything. But if someone, I admit, I had a friend of mine who said they were hit in domestic abuse, and I got really angry, even though I did not have any proof of this, because I have this standard when I in general. But when it comes to this friend I had who got punched in this domestic violence situation, I immediately felt I was changing my stance a little bit, because I know the person, and hated what it was. But we also have this approach when, for example, when there are children involved, and we especially have to believe children when they are getting involved. So society in general is a little bit, let's say, hypocritical. Even those who use we need and they're probably the same crowd that would believe a child that said they were getting abused by someone in the family, whoever it is, and they would press charges, even though there wouldn't be much of evidence of this.
Right.
Would you agree to that?
Yeah, and children, it's even a worse situation, because a child isn't always the most articulate, and they don't understand things like evidence and proof and documentation, they're scared. And oftentimes, if there's abuse involved, it's from the people that they are most reliant on. So they're really in a bad place, and it's really easy.
People they trust.
Yeah, people they trust, but also people who have more world experience and can, for instance, manipulate information and make themselves seem innocent. That happens all the time. But I mean, it's absolutely there's two layers, right? So like you said with your friend getting domestically abused, like instantly you want to protect the person.
Yeah.
But when it comes to judgment and punishment, that's when now it's a little more important to be skeptical. So when an accusation comes out, I think the listen and believe mantra is an effort to say, don't discount what the person's saying when they bring up the accusation. Good policy.
Yeah.
Hear it out. Yeah. Treat them, that person, as they're talking to you, as if everything they're saying is 100% true. And be gentle, because if it is, I don't think there's a worse trauma in the world.
Yeah.
After that, pursue justice with no bias. So now you need evidence. You need to know what's credible, what's not credible. And especially, it's unfortunate to say, and it's hard to say without it sounding horrible, but in the case of something as traumatic as a rape, it's really hard as a victim to be objective.
Yeah,
so even,
that is true.
Yeah, even self-accounting of an experience could be could suffer from hyperbole, just because the emotions and the trauma of the experience makes it very hard to
trauma,
see clearly.
shame, all the emotions.
Yeah, and it's simultaneously one of the worst crimes in my mind, because if you think about it, if it happens, like if to a victim, there is almost no way to prove it unless you instantly take action to collect the evidence.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing you could possibly have to do right after something like that happens.
Yeah, that is true. It's I remember a case where there was actually a guy that got raped, and what was interesting is that there were lawyers, some prominent.
Your audio cut out.
For someone.
Oh, there you are. I lost you after you said there were some lawyers.
Oh, sorry. There were some defense attorneys that where this guy got raped, and he was going to court for being raped, and these defense attorneys didn't really have anything to do with the case. They were just laughing at him in interviews when they got interviewed of what they thought about the case, and he should have just shut up and enjoyed it. So
interesting
is seeing how things like that. It's I would say it's highly unethical to even comment on such a case without having insight to the evidence. And I mean, our lawyers have a high should have a high standard of ethics when it comes to especially something as horrible as rape. The case was ongoing, so I can't remember the outcome of this particular trial, but I still remember vividly how these lawyers were basically laughing because it was a guy who allegedly got raped, and for somehow it was okay for these people to say this.
So that's actually an interesting point. I think the highest ethical standard at that point in the process, during the evidence collection, is to be dispassionate, completely. You should have no bias. You should have no judgment. You should have no feelings. You should just be trying to get to the truth. No commentary. There's no place for that at that moment. So that's quite shameful on their part.
Yeah, and they were doing defense attorneys. I believe one of them was he died I think last year or something, but he was, I believe, one of the top 5 or top 3 defense attorneys in the country, and he said that, which is, I mean, what kind of message would that send to society and victims of something when you do something like that in such a public manner, and you're supposed to be a defense attorney?
Well, it tells you what his attitude is towards sex and women.
Yeah.
And men, for that matter.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just look at. I know Twitter isn't the best, but it's kind of a pulse of society, or just social media, and
Part of
you
it, yeah.
just see, yeah, and you see people. I struggle with all the articles and videos and just tweets I see, and people either have so much apathy, or they use moral relativism to suit the arguments, especially in regards to, I mean, the alt-right isn't really that prominent in culture, but I mean, Richard Spencer said he's not for pro speech, even though he's using free speech to share his message, which is more relativism. So he would not allow free speech under his, I don't know what he was called. He called his utopia. But then you also have the same kind of people on the extreme left who are using the same type of. I mean, you can use the argument of ethics. Oh, or moral relativism rather, of we should. Listen, I believe, to going back to the Dr. Ford, but we shouldn't believe the accusers of Bill Clinton, or what's the co-chair of DNC, Allison.
Well, there should be no question that the entire thing was politically driven.
Yeah. So I mean, you should either have. I think we covered this. The consistency is just so much. The key is either you have one standard, or you should just have one standard. You can't just have double standards when it's your camp that's being accused of something.
So yeah, then that goes back again though to the layers of ethics, that they're operating in an ethical microcosm and sacrificing the larger and broader society for it in positions of power. So that is like a perfect example of ultimately unethical behavior. I want to get back to the Kavanaugh thing, because there was something I think is really worth pointing out there. But you mentioned Richard Spencer, alt-right. I had a really funny thought recently. You know how it seems like every time people want to discredit you, they will compare you to the alt-right, or for instance with Peterson, they'll be like, the alt-right loves Peterson, so that makes him bad, right? Did you cut out there? There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
There we go.
So you've heard this, I'm sure, right?
Well, what did you say? I skipped out after Richard Spencer.
Oh, I skipped out. Okay. Yikes. When people on the left want to discredit you, they will often either call you alt-right, or in the case of Jordan Peterson, suggest that he sucks because the alt-right love him.
Yeah, guilt by association.
Right. So, but this was interesting to me. I recently thought about it. It's like, do they realize that Richard Spencer loved Black Panther?
Really? Oh yeah, because of because of the logic.
Sargon pointed this out, is that Wakanda is Richard Spencer's entire thesis presented.
Yeah,
like
I know.
a one race, isolated nation. So I don't know. That I thought was funny when I realized, like, oh, well, if Peterson's evil, then by the same standard, Black Panther must be awful too. But of course, that's not true. But with the Kavanaugh case, so we get the first step ethically is to listen and believe. I do agree with that in terms of how you treat the person. After that, and in particular with the Senate, I think what should happen is the rest of that entire I don't even know what to call it. It's not a trial. But all the questioning, all the investigation should have been handled behind closed doors.
Yes.
There is no reason to put that woman on television, national television, in front of the entire country to have to go through all that. That is not only unethical, that is insensitive in most extreme.
Yeah. And if she was, because we don't know, because there are no witnesses or anything like that. But let's give her the benefit of the doubt and say if it wasn't Brad Kavanaugh but someone else, if she, let's just say she was assaulted, what good does it do towards her going on national television towards and doing this in front of basically the whole world and just say this? And I mean, it doesn't do her any good. It's so unethical to do this, because the only ones who are gaining something are the people who wanted her to come forward into the public, basically to either score points politically or whatever it is. And she doesn't benefit from it. Maybe now and afterwards she's gonna get a book deal or whatever. But in that time, when she did the hearing, I mean, it didn't really benefit her. She might have gotten tons of death threats. Same with Kavanaugh, because of the everything that came out. I mean,
his house was destroyed. They graffitied his home where he lived and were protesting outside of his home. Like, I don't know what she got. I haven't seen video or photo of it, but what Kavanaugh got was frightening.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's outside of that, and this is what makes me so angry about the whole process. Like, if we start with step one and say, if someone comes forward with an accusation of such a crime, take them at their word. You don't treat a victim like that. You don't put them on national television in a theater and make them tell the entire world this most horrible thing that happened to them. If you really care about that person, if you really care what happened, like, you just, I don't see how any Democratic senators who went through that process with her think they have the moral high ground.
Yeah.
Found it absolutely disgusting. And it's also what makes me very skeptical that it's even true.
Yeah, that is a good point. Well, here's going a little bit away from the Kavanaugh case. Going back to the, let's say, on a national level, compared to the world. How much? What would be the most ethical thing to do? I know we have the globalists, we have the nationalists, we have anarchists who would just want on local level. We have socialists. I mean, we have all the different political leanings in the world. But just looking at a country, when it comes to foreign relations, I mean, U.S. is a superpower in the world, and what's the most ethical thing to do when you have so much power? When do you actually intervene in if there's, let's say, a war or political unrest in a country? When when would be the best time, or if at all?
It's a really, really interesting and hard question. On one hand, I think I can give a simple version of it and say when somebody asks you to. And at the very least, I think that invitation should be step one. But if we even just remove the context of America being a superpower, like what is, if I to borrow a term from Sam Harris, the best possible good for all people, what would be the most ethical behavior for all world powers? I think to some extent it has to be a hands-off approach, because, for instance, if we take one of the darling examples of the Middle East and the violence and chaos that some of those countries are going through, that might be what is necessary to get them to the next step of their cultural evolution. And by interfering with that, we set them back instead of allowing progress to happen. Imagine if during the American Civil War, some other country had intervened. We might still have slavery. Not to say that that's definitely what would happen, but it is conceivable. Or at the very least, we never would have gotten past it as quickly as we did, because there would have been a lot more pain as a result. So yeah. I think like with your kids, you have to allow them to grow at their own rate.
Yeah, because I've been watching a very interesting. I just finished a very interesting documentary. I think it's a PBS. I think it's a miniseries. It's I think 10 episodes of the Vietnam War. And that's a very interesting case, because I didn't really have that much insight to that war. But when it started out, it was basically the French who were basically looked at Vietnamese as basically below them, and they ruled Vietnam, and then they rebelled, and U.S. was actually supporting the Viet Cong at first, even though and because I think even JFK and Robert Kennedy sympathized with them, and then the whole communist question came into the fray with meddling of Soviet Russia. But anyway, the whole thing was that this was a contained thing in Vietnam, and the U.S. Thought it would, even though it has not directly anything to do with anything in regards to the U.S., they intervened, and basically losing, especially at that time, with the whole civil rights and things like that, they spent so much money instead of on its own people on a war on basically farmers with each other. And in the end, I mean, the Viet Cong won, even though the US spent so much time and effort in that. And then now we see decades later, Vietnam has a good relationship with the US, even though the communists, the so-called communists, won.
And isn't that amazing too? Just to make a point there, that, I mean, geez, that's only what, 40, 50 years ago. That we can have a war with another country, that like real oppression, and now they're kind of doing okay, we're doing okay, and we get along.
Yeah, and but just looking, because it's a quite interesting situation, because until that point, the U.S. Thought they couldn't do any wrong, and thought, I mean, both sides were actually thinking they were doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think we still suffer from that to a large extent.
Yeah, because Viet Cong wanted to have self-rule, and so they got the French out, and then the U.S. intervened, even though Viet Cong were sympathizing how US was formed, and they thought that the US would support self rule and things like that, and then they turn and they intervened in basically what would be the Vietnam Civil War, and just looking at it, it's just such a tragedy of 58,000 people or Americans, and I don't even know how many hundreds of thousands of people that lost uh,
Yeah.
their life in, I would say, in very very meaningless war.
Yeah, way
Uh,
more death than should have ever had to have happened there.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because just looking at how how they did that war, because they basically took several mountains tops and hills where hundreds of Marines and soldiers died, and then they just abandoned it, and then a week later they fought the same hill, which is such a disregard to human life that
Well,
I mean. Uh, I think that has to be one of the most unethical wars I have ever seen in modern times, since especially since Second World War. Even though the Iraq War or anything like that, it hasn't been ethical at all. But the amount of scale of people dying, I think the Vietnam War is just a tragedy.
yeah, I think, and I guess part of this is wishful thinking. I think that the Vietnam, the whole situation, the war, and everything that happened would be one of the flagship events in the history of mankind that marked the end of imperial rule by Europe. So there'd
Yeah,
be several things like South Africa, India, and different things of that nature that have occurred very recently in the last 100 years, where these behaviors are stopping. I hope, and then we
yeah,
can move
that
evolution.
that's actually a good point, because there was a lot of oppression during that time. I mean, even in the U.S., you had people getting assassinated for calling for ethics, for calling for freedom, and we had Martin Luther King, we had Robert Kennedy, JFK. I mean, there were so many people killed during that time for people who wanted, basically. We don't know what would have happened if they continued living on. I mean, Robert Kennedy basically won the most likely would have won the presidency, and you would have avoided the whole Nixon situation.
Mm.
Um, but that's just looking at it after you know all the facts 40 years afterwards.
Yeah, the U.S. seems to have a remarkable penchant for killing its most peaceful and wisest thought leaders very young. I mean, even accidentally, like Bruce Lee is one of the people that, in terms of that, I think we lost so much by him dying so young.
Yeah,
Like what his teachings could have done for our culture is unfathomable.
I think it's not always uh, it's not always that person dying is the big tragedy. It's the void afterwards.
Yeah, but it's, and I just use that example because that's one of the things that hurts me the most with coming from a martial arts background. But like Kennedy, uh, Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is probably, I think, one of the greatest things to ever come out of America in terms of just a quality person who had a voice that was needed, and he stood up strong and peaceful. Like he really stood on good moral ground,
Mm.
uniquely in our history.
Ethically and morally, I don't think there are few people that are on his level. I would claim.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even in the world, but I can't imagine in terms of American culture and driving it to a good place, anybody who did more for the country and our philosophy as a culture.
Yeah, you have that guy in India. What's his name?
Gandhi.
Gandhi. Yeah, For some reason, I was thinking of Buddha, but that's not his name.
No, Buddha was India too. But I'm
Yeah, I
saying,
know. That's
in
why
terms of
I
somebody
somehow
who,
switched the names.
like, if you try to think about American thought leaders, people who were born and raised here and, you know, made deposits into the public consciousness in some way or another, or just, you know, and you can be a little bit flexible about with that. Like maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger, you could say, is an American thought leader, even though he wasn't born here. He spent most of his time here. And
Yeah, but just
certainly,
think where he came from. Like this guy, he started as nothing. Then he started building bodybuilding, and then he
yeah,
thought, "Oh, I can probably let's do acting," and he did it. And then he said, "I want to become a politician," and I became a politician.
yeah,
Like that
he just
guy
decided to
is,
kick ass at everything he took on.
yeah. So yeah,
But
I agree with you with him.
I don't know if America can take credit for raising him, maybe just giving him a guiding light. But Martin Luther King, born and raised in America, and despite the circumstances he was born under and everything he must have seen in his life, who he became and what he deposited into public consciousness
Cheers.
is a miracle.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, in terms of everybody that I think has ever
When
lived in this country, probably the most important figure.
Yeah, well, when in regards to these big thought leaders, when let's take Nelson Mandela. He's not. I mean, a lot of people use him as basically a saint, but he wasn't, because he did sabotage against his own countries on. But he did it for rights. He thought black people were missing in their own country. When would you say it's ethical to go to that extreme?
That's something that I don't think you can form a concrete ethical guideline. You really have to make a judgment. It could go either way, because you can't know all the forces that are behind whatever is happening, and you can't know how the public or the powers that be would respond.
That is true.
Your best guess.
Yeah, because there is a very fine line between doing what Nelson Mandela did and what Antifa is advocating.
I don't know if there's a fine line.
No, but just looking at the action, because they were basically doing vandalism. If you just look at the whole picture, even though there were a lot of different reasons behind it, but in the end, what Mandela and Antifa are doing is basically vandalism. So I think the reason behind it is the driving factor, and also the society they live in, for what they base.
It's an interesting parallel, because I think it'd be hard to argue that what Nelson Mandela was responding to was not clearly wrong. On the other hand, it is at least clear to me that the things Antifa are responding to, and what you might dub the radical left, are at best blown way out of proportion, at worst completely imaginary.
Yeah, I know that's why I think the reasons behind it, I think, matter a lot. What you base your base your ethics off for doing this. What Mandela was doing is basically, I wanna bring this attention nationwide that we have a problem. If you did it in the correct way, I mean, that could be discussed. But he was trying to do something to shed light and do it for rights. People were lacking freedoms, basic freedoms. People were not having. Well, right. Antifa is doing this for people they disagree with. Well, and go ahead.
So this is interesting. if from the perspective of somebody who would be an Antifa, if they didn't do what they're doing, I would actually question their moral strength. Just because based on what they believe, what they've been taught, what they've been indoctrinated to see as reality. From that perspective, their behavior makes complete sense. But if you zoom out, if you look at objective reality and you take in more information than just what you've been spoon-fed, for instance, at university or by your political tribe, it's really wrong, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we do have the bike lock incident where this guy got basically probation for trying to murder someone.
I think it's just a case of some very misguided people, and it's funny. I had a conversation with somebody about this last night. The guy, comes from a family of engineers. He was an engineer, and we were just talking about everybody's so angry and so depressed about the state of affairs right now, and like there's no shortage of videos on YouTube that will talk about everything wrong with America and how things are getting worse, and it's just not true on any dimension. And we agreed in this conversation that I don't know how you could live today and not feel overwhelmingly lucky to not have lived at any other time previous.
Yeah, we're basically at the safest time in human history.
We're at the safest time, the most technologically advanced. We have a near complete understanding of most of what directly impacts our lives. Medicine has a way to go in some areas, but you can see us completing enough of an understanding in the near future that most maladies that affect humankind will be taken care of. That's insane. Having a cell phone with all the information of all of existence available to you 24/7, that's insane. Crime rates, access to trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure and roads and public transportation, planes that'll get you anywhere on the planet in less than a day. Like, this stuff is crazy. It's just absolutely nuts. And to not appreciate that, to be like, this country sucks, fuck everybody, blow everything up, burn down the houses. Like, dude, what? There's problems, but there's always going to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's always gonna be problems. On what scale is what's the issue? Not forgetting to buy tooth a toothbrush at the store. That's like a problem. And then you have on a larger issue, there's always going to be problems of some kinds. That's kind of the human experience of having problems,
of being imperfect, really.
Yeah, and seeing these people who are basic. I think it's the generation. This generation of young people who are people that are joining Black Lives Matter and Antifa and things like that in these extremist groups, alt-right as well, where they see in history people have always fought for something. In the 1700s, I mean, it was just basic freedom with forming of the U.S. and I mean, and then going to workers' rights and healthcare, and then now in modern times we have, especially in the Western world, we have all the rights. We have freedom of speech, all of these things that we need to survive. We basically have we were so good at surviving. People are getting basically killing themselves by eating hamburgers. Too many hamburgers, and then you have these people who just have looked at history and think that we have some problems and we need to magnify and fight for them. But if you look at objective reality, what they are fighting for they're only fighting for something because they think they have something to fight for.
So, right. I think we should always have something to fight for. I think it's probably embedded in our nature, and there almost certainly always will be something. So, as good as things are now, for instance, it's very clear that the scales of income are getting really, really messed up. I think I've seen it suggested that income inequality in the U.S. is getting very close to pre-French Revolutionary War levels. That's something to think about. That's something to be concerned about. But I, as far as Antifa, Black Lives Matter, all these things, my theory or hypothesis about this is that it's a confluence of issues where you have a lot of people who were raised in an era and culture where there was so much more understanding than ever before, for instance, of neurology, of psychology, of, maybe you don't want to physically discipline kids because of what it does to them. They could be more productive in society if they have higher confidence. So they've been told how great they are. Then they've been given participation medals, and they've gotten fewer negative consequences for bad behavior. You take that to the next level, you go to college, and I have a hard time not suspecting that there are people who saw this happening and took advantage of the vulnerability of young minds to plant these political seeds in their heads. Like the current like gender studies professors and those types of courses and classes, those are older people. Those aren't millennials. They are causing the problem. And it's hard to believe that there was good intentions behind what they're doing. Because they're so authoritative about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think these people are, I don't know what's actually driving it, if it's power, if it's the influence, or just sharing their own belief, or whatever it is. I think it's, I mean, we see Hungary. They just removed gender studies completely because of how things are going at the moment. And
that actually reminds me. Did you hear about this this recent experiment these guys did at college where they submitted?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Like
they
put in fake academic
Peter Pogosian and two other professors. I think I don't know how many papers. I think 50 papers. 7 of them got approved to these magazines, for those who are watching, and the most one of them got in an anniversary edition of this magazine that got published, and also peer approved, peer reviewed, not peer approved, peer reviewed, of a dog. What was it? Rape culture in dog parks. And there was also one
that got peer reviewed. And
published? Peer reviewed and published. Jeez. In a 20th anniversary for some magazine, and there was also fat bodybuilding.
Yes.
Also. Jesus Christ.
That what stood out to me? There was a couple. There was one where it got they accepted the academic paper, and it was literally just jumble. So
yeah, there was also one with Mein Kampf where they changed the words.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where they literally took the transcript and just put in the buzzwords of like patriarchy, male privilege, and like, I have suspected for a long time now that if you replaced a lot of the points where they're like cis white hetero male and just put in Jew, that you would have word for word verbatim Nazi propaganda. And that practically proves it for me.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've said it for a long time. Just switch out a few of the words of what these feminists or SJW, whatever you want to call them, and you have a racist or a Nazi or whatever, and you have these people screeching a Nazi at everyone else. It's projection at its finest.
Well, yeah, there's clear parallels, but I've wondered Like basically what they did. Like, could you take actual historical Nazi propaganda, swap in cis white male, and then find somebody who said that exact thing?
Huh.
I haven't been able to find a good source for historical Nazi propaganda, but I really, really wonder, because did you ever see the kid in the striped pajamas?
No, but I know of it. I know what the entire movie is about.
It's a powerful movie. I gotta say, there's few things that have impacted me that hard. But there was one scene in the movie where they are playing some propaganda, and they're saying things like, the Jew has collected all of the power in the world, and they're using their money and influence to oppress other people. We must fight this. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar, doesn't it?
Yes. And the thing is, there's some truth to it, right? Like, there were imperial powers in history, and Imperial Europe did a lot of damage in the world, did a lot of crazy things. But like today, it's a little different.
Yeah, I would actually, if I would, I probably need to read some stuff in, because I can read and speak German. I could probably read some stuff and maybe find something that would be actually very interesting. I actually wanted to read Mein Kampf just how the language, the logic, and just the arguments that basically Hitler was spewing while he was in jail in Germany. That's when he wrote the book. That's basically his manifesto for the entire, and so it's actually an interesting proposition you have. It's actually something I've been thinking about of reading, not translated, but in its original form.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, if you can do it, man, run with it. I've been really curious to see if there are such close parallels as to be, indisputable, that people calling others Nazis are in fact spewing Nazi propaganda. But and in terms of Mein Kampf, it's funny. When I was in high school, the belief was that if you bought Mein Kampf, for instance, at a bookstore, you would instantly get on an FBI watch list. And I think it should be required reading. Like, I think we should be very well informed of that mentality and very scared of getting anywhere near it.
Yeah, because it wasn't actually allowed to be printed in Germany until, what was it, October of last year, something like that. Actually, I think it's a year ago. They started to, because of the copyright stuff, but it's also a law that expired. Something like that. I can't remember all the details, but I believe now you can buy Mein Kampf in Germany, because they've been very, very strict with Hitler or just Nazi stuff in general.
Yeah, I've actually been privileged to meet people from Germany as a result of driving, and it's interesting to hear just how much impact that time period still has on everything they can and can't do.
Oh yeah, it's basically in the German conscience. I even with me, even though I didn't really know what it was until I got older, it was basically in German society and consciousness of people being ashamed. That's why I think acting like a psychologist here, a little bit armchair psychologist, but looking at all the things Germany have done since the Second World War until now, like taking all these refugees in, is basically trying to make up for the Second World War. It might be a good thing that Merkel or the other ones are trying to do. I don't even know the motivations behind them, but I think a lot of people in Germany are want to do this basically to repair what the generation before them, because those in power are basically the people who grew up after the Second World War, and trying to not only fix the country but fix themselves. And if you can understand that, Solomon.
That makes perfect sense. Actually, it's a pretty common, I think, psychological response to extreme mistakes to do the opposite extreme.
Yeah.
Not necessarily even as a way to make up for it, but just as I don't ever want to do that again, sort of thing. And it's funny because it reminds me of a saying in a book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. He said, the opposite of crazy is still crazy. If you think.
Oh, sorry, you cut out a little. Yeah, okay. Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Quote? Did you hear the quote?
Yeah, you have to repeat it. You cut out exactly when you did the quote.
Oh, that sucks, dude. It's such a good one. He said, the opposite of crazy is still crazy.
Yeah.
So if you're nice to the point of being insane, the opposite of that is being mean to the point of insane.
Yeah, and I've been to Germany a few times since then, and people, I would say our age, are so fed up with basically having this. It's not this is quote unquote white guilt. It's just German guilt put into, and younger people are so fed up with having the responsibility of not even the parents, but maybe grandparents or great grandparents that did something they had no control over, and they have to take responsibility and basically apologize and feel the guilt of something they had no part of doing anything with that. So that's also something I've noticed in regards to that. So yeah, it's a good point. You always have to I can't remember the Sun Tzu quote, but you have to know your enemy as good as yourself, or something like that. Is a quote of Sun Tzu, and it's basically a good rule for life. If there are evil people spewing hateful stuff, you should know their arguments and why they believe what they believe.
Yeah, and actually there's a great quote that relates to the Sun Tzu quote. It's an African proverb, if I'm not mistaken. It says, if you master the enemy within, the enemy without can do you no harm.
Yeah, that's actually also a good quote.
I love that one.
And
actually, I'm looking at the time. We gotta probably wrap this up in a couple minutes because I gotta run and get my kids.
Yeah, I was about to say that we've been going for a long time. I don't want to just go rambling on for a long time, but yeah, I think these discussions are always very interesting because it's basically exercising our thoughts and trying to see if they hold up. That's why I keep inviting you on.
Yeah, everybody needs to be doing this. This is the privilege of our society, is to be able to ask hard questions and really, really spend time on them.
Yeah, because it's sometimes it's just thoughts that are in the back of my head, but I don't really get to stretch and see if they can hold, if they get challenged, if they meet struggle, if the muscle is good enough, or if it still needs to be challenged a little bit more. So I view as my arguments and thoughts as muscles that either need exterior influence or just need more training. So that's what I view this as basically thought exercise and discussion in general.
Yeah, sounds good to me, man.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to stop. I'm gonna put your links in the description. Just send me them on Discord so I can put them in the description. and people can check your stuff out because you do a daily vlog, I believe, and
Yeah,
you also do.
It's rambling more than anything. Actually, if this kind of stuff appeals to somebody, this is more the sort of thing I want to start doing more of on the Rethink channel, and I've got now a lot of ideas. But what I would promote if I was to do so is the debates between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. That's what I'm watching right now, and that is so rich in thought and content. Like, I'm really enjoying those.
Yeah, I'm trying to do more response videos, try the ideas I disagree with or even agree with, and try to. So I'm doing more of that route as well, trying to do respond videos because when I do videos just on a single topic, I think it's a little more static. When I have a response video, I can go a little bit back and forth and change it up a little bit. So
sure.
All right. I'm not gonna keep you because you have other things to do. Thank you for joining me, dude.
My pleasure, man.
All right. For those who are watching this now or later, thank you guys for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye.